We're in Virginia City, Montana, an old mining town.
Have one older than that. It was a hand crank.
This is looking inside one of these storefront windows here. There's a new porch roof. This building was the dress shop. Getting a lot of reflection off the window. Scenes behind me and me. This building, I would guess, was a toy shop.
Jeweler and toy store.
Jeweler and toy store.
Oh, Pioneer Surgeon established an office here in 1870.
Here's a city bakery. Now, say that again about the ox.
Bob Backer was telling me it was someplace he visited. I guess it was at Nauru. When you shoe an ox, they can't lift their feet like a horse. They have a contraption that lifts the whole ox to put shoes on them.
Tours. Let's do a tour.
Okay. I want to.
But the next tour on that is at 1 o'clock. It's about 8 minutes after 12. I don't know if I don't think we want to wait around that long to go on a tour that might take an hour or two.
Unless you want to get a sandwich.
Well, we could go find out how long the tour goes. We're going to go have some lunch here at this Outlaws Cafe.
Yeah, I'm not enjoying it. Just let you know that I didn't die on you.
I have a French dip sandwich.
Stuff. Anyway, before we leave, a little bit about how Virginia City got started, and the time period is 1862. Now that year they discovered gold in a ghost town today called Bannock, west 70 miles today. It's a state park. The next year, 6 miners from Bannock were over in this country looking for gold, and right at the end of the street, Alder Gulch, you'll see it later, these men came across one of the world's largest placer gold discoveries. And placer simply meant the gold's location was right along the surface of the stream bed. Miners would even refer to it as free gold sometimes because it was relatively easy to get, but it never was free. A lot of these people got nothing here for their efforts but a tombstone. The gold in those days, $16 an ounce. Have you followed the gold market? All summer long, $1,100, $1,200, $1,300 an ounce. Back then, 16 bucks, well, he mined over $100 million worth of those values. That's a pile of gold that rolled out of here, and you have to remember that obviously at that time this was a wilderness. There were no roads, and you know, under those primitive conditions, 2 years later, almost 35,000 people had found their way into this valley. They called it gold fever. They came here from all over the world. We had miners, merchants, and you know, back then, folks, there were people that didn't want to work. Imagine that. They called these people road agents. And they were the outlaws doing the holdups, and this was a tough town. They all were. Virginia City had over 100 murders the first year. So that fall, a lot of the miners were masons, and the lodge across the street, which they still use, they said enough of this, took the law into their own hands, and called themselves the vigilantes. They'd done it before. Colorado, California, same deal. They went out after these so-called road agents, and they hanged 22 of them in 6 weeks. 5 all in the same day.
Good.
January 14th, 64, dead of winter, they brought 5 suspects into town. There was an outdoor trial for these men right on this corner. 3 hours later, all 5 men pronounced guilty. Things are moving right along, and now they're looking for a place to hang these men. Well, that didn't take long either. This building on the corner right there with the open door we refer to as the Hangman's Building, only because on that day it just happened to be under construction. The roof wasn't on it yet, but you can see in the center edge of the roof, that bump in the middle, that's a beam pocket, and a beam went side to side, kept the walls parallel. That was in place and all they needed. Took those 5 men over there and they made them climb up on big tall boxes. Folks, this is the 1 o'clock if you wanted to join us.
No, we'll go to the next one.
They took those 5 men over there and made them climb up on big tall boxes. This wasn't a formal occasion. And then he jumped to his death. Jefferson Davis, the President of the South in '64, and obviously a Confederate supporter right to the very end. Anybody remember who was President of the U.S. during the Civil War?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abe Lincoln. Like Jeopardy around here, first correct answer gets the prize. Sir, we have a free buffalo chip for you after the tour. That's always a good fire starter. You know, here's a survival tip. We went from ice cream to survival tips in my latest outdoor life. If you break down, it's all cold, you want to start a fire, everything's wet. Doritos makes a good fire starter, so there you have it. You might have to give up a meal, but if you can stay warm all night with those Doritos, it'll be worth it. So with that, we're going to go for a ride. But back then, on the 4th of July, everybody, of course, would come into town to celebrate. I've seen the old photographs. Hundreds of miners right here in front. Well, they're all dressed up, but they're putting on rock drilling contests because they were all miners. They're the governor's mansion. And you know what? For its time, it certainly was a mansion, because remember, just a few blocks away, back in Alder Gulch, thousands of miners are down there. Those people never even had a place to live, some even wintering underneath of their wagons. Well, they're over 100 years old. Think of the stories those trees could tell of all those celebrations here in town. You can just see those people all dressed up in their Victorian attire. Daylight Creek, no gold was ever found there. Again, it was all down below us in Alder Gulch. They made beer here right up until Prohibition 1919, when they locked its doors forever. The wagon we see in front was one of their more popular vehicles, an early beer delivery wagon. Imagine that loaded down with those great big wooden barrels of beer and being pulled through town with a heavy hitch of horses. Notice the heavy springs over the axles as well. That entire wagon was built by hand. Next door, to the right of the brewery, that building is a perfect example of the false fronts. We've seen them built like this in all the old western towns. There was a purpose for that. They were trying to make the buildings and town appear larger than they really were, so they would resemble the larger buildings and cities of the East, which is where they'd all come from. And it sure gave the town a lot more dimension. Even fake windows and door, they went to a lot of attention for detail. Folks, to give you an idea with it, where the Beermeister started his business, and you can see it went well because he built this big building just a year later. You know, a lot of the miners did strike it rich, but remember that most of them didn't. It was the merchants who usually made the money. The Gilbert family did well with the brewery they had in Montana. And you know, Charlie Bovey, when he was a little boy, he was in Europe with his family on a buying trip. Well, they were due to come back to the U.S., and young Charlie, well, he came down with a whooping cough. Quite a few movies here, and we'll mention a couple of those a little bit later. We're about to arrive on Mill Hill. These men died and were buried with their doors ajar. That's how the term got started. I would suspect if the dead is destroyed, their boots. Some items were changed, folks, and these 5 here, the men we spoke of earlier, hang downtown. There's no one here really famous, but right in the middle, Boone Helm, he's the man that hollered out, "Hooray for Jefferson Davis," as he jumped to his death. He was also a convicted cannibal up in Canada. Down on the right, George Lane, his nickname Clubfoot George, he had a shoe repair business down on the main street. That was a cover-up. His job in life was to watch the stage office for any departing gold shipments. Now, folks, it was only back in the 1920s, some of the locals downtown arguing about whether or not these men were even here. By then, no one maintained the cemetery. Tombstones had fallen over, some were even stolen. The bet was on, and they grabbed their shovels, came up here and dug up George. Those were those miners made that initial discovery in 1863. And downtown, the white building in the center says Overland Mail. Straight behind the square white one was the hospital at one time. There was an armory, a militia, 2 active theaters, and a band. And if you drove over from Ennis, on the top of the hill there's a flat stretch up there. Well, that was the racetrack, and on Sundays they would go up there and race the horses. Boot Hill was originally called Burial Hill. That's why so many people were first buried up here, including the grave on the right here of William and Clara Dalton. They're not related to the famous Dalton Outlaws. They came out here on the wagon train to Bannock in '62. Well, they moved over here in '63. There was an epidemic called the mountain fever, and many people were dying. William and Clara, they both got the disease and died within 7 days of each other. They left behind 4 children.
Stone
Years
says
later,
64.
their granddaughter Matilda, she's buried over in Dillon, put the stone wall around the grave to separate it from those of the outlaws. But once the road agents were buried up here, people didn't want to be buried next to these undesirables, so they started the new cemetery behind us. Somebody have a question back there?
Well, I thought the stone said.
Here on the right, this little cabin is an original from the 1860s. You can see they didn't build them very tall. They just wanted some shelter from the weather. But remember, if you had a cabin like that, complete with dirt floor, how lucky you were, because again, across the road, thousands of miners living in tents, caves, lean-tos, anything they could do to get in and out of the weather. That was. Where the depot sits, extending across the highway, a Chinese community. A 2-story Chinese temple sat right here in the middle of the road. And on the left corner of the log cabin is the schoolhouse from Adobe Town, 2 miles north, that went all the way through the 8th grade. Street lamps were kerosene. Somebody had to light them every night, come back in the morning and put them out. Virginia City Players on the right, been performing here for over 60 years. They're closed for the year. And again on the right, Van LaHaye Saloon. Several movies were filmed in there. The latest, Return to Lonesome Dove. Little Big Man was another with Dustin Hoffman. And on the left, the Dancing Steward. Remember Clubfoot George? Well, that's where George had his shoe repair business so he could watch the stage office up the street. The Stewart is a replica where the rest of these pretty much as they were over 100 years ago. If you walk the boardwalk, you're going to see several blacksmith shops. They employed a large number of people. One blacksmith even gave singing lessons once a week. Dance lessons were popular. A miner would travel many miles.
Here we're coming into Nevada City, which is only about a mile or so from
Yeah, you can walk.
Virginia City.
Look, there's a train.
Oh, and a little train you can ride in an old dredge.
There's no railroad here. There's,
A real old one.
oh wow, look at this house.
Oh yeah, wow, cool. Well, now we're out of Nevada City. Didn't last long. On our way to intersect with I-90 up the road. Well, it's quite a ways yet. This is the KOA campground in Missoula, Montana. And it's a pretty large place. Zip around here real fast. Zip, 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 zip. See a lot of them way up there. Anyway, we're here on Tuesday night and going to head the rest of the way tomorrow morning. Well, we're approaching Moses Lake. Driving down Interstate 90. And kind of looks like parts of Idaho. So we got about 3 to 4 more hours worth of driving to do to get to Brian's house. And here we are at Moses Lake.
This must be Moses Lake.
This is Moses Lake. And there's Moses Lake. Yay! Lake over here too.
She's not, hasn't been all there for a while. She's
exit 176.
No longer with the third. She's doing somewhat.
Says Quincy Wenatchee, exit 1 mile. And pretty soon we'll be coming up on this spot in the road called George Washington. Somewhere over there yet. But we're getting close to it. Hospital, next right. I believe that's George in front of us here.
There's the sign.
Yeah, here's the sign. George, 1 mile. There it is. The big metropolitan area of George, Washington. Doot, 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 doot. Okay, the next stop is going to be the Columbia River. This is the Columbia River. And we're here in this viewpoint area. Sure.
Oh, no, no. You got it? I self
We're going to be going across that bridge here when we leave. The ginkgo petrified forest.
Here it says it no longer exists in the wild state.
This sign over here says the Wanapans, a group of Indians that never fought against the white guys coming in. And although numbering in thousands at one time, the Wanapans are now virtually extinct. They probably just intermarried and became extinct that way. I believe that's the dam. Well, I'm not sure. Isn't there a dam up there? I think, anyway, I believe there's a dam up there. This is a parking lot, kind of. I'm walking back, and then we'll head on. Put your finger in the front of the...
I didn't.
Oh, okay. Columbia River.